certain portions of the left have been all abuzz about a document that was supposedly suppressed by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. The claim is that the document proves that the dozens of civilians killed by chemicals in Douma last year, the deaths were caused by the rebels themselves. I'll be speaking to Clay Claiborne, who has been reporting on chemical weapons in Syria for several years with enormous intensity and attention to detail. He's a blogger. He's made films, one of them being Vietnam American Holocaust, and a systems administrator. He's presently in Venice, California. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Stanley. How are you?
Very good. So what do you think of this supposed suppressed document?
Before I get into the details of the document or my criticism of it, I like to set the context a little bit and remind everyone that this is being discussed. The document was released exactly when Bashar Assad and his Russian supporters were starting their offensive on Idlib. And while we're discussing this, they're really mercilessly bombing civilians in Idlib. So I think the context we have to see this in is largely being a distraction from that. You know, the fact that everyone or so many of us that have been watching Syria for so long are focused on this rather than that. The people that are dying really by the hundreds this May and June compared to, 60 or 70, some would say a lot less, that died from chlorine in April of 2018. That being said, looking at this executive summary, and remember, it only claims to be an executive summary, and to me, this is a little bit unusual because we don't have the document as being summarized. My experience with executive summaries is that's like the first chapter of, or the first part of a big volume that maybe you don't want to have to read. So you read the executive summary. And you have confidence in that executive summary largely because it stands in the front of a whole long piece that you assume will back up the findings of the executive summary. You know, if you doubt, if it's like you distrust these people, then you could go and spend the time with the other material and say, hey, this executive summary sounds like A.G. Barr's summary of the Mueller report. Mm-hmm. I would say that to the extent this is executive summary of anything, it is more like Barr's summary of the Mueller report as compared to a real summary of the findings of the fact-finding mission in Syria. So that's my first question on it, or first point on it. We don't have all the data that's behind this. It doesn't have any footnotes. It doesn't have any links to other stuff. I know when I write an article, when you write an article, it's always a lot of links, sources of material. People can go further to see where we got our conclusions from. And we don't have that ability here. We don't have access to the data. He doesn't even get links to it. And it is only written by one person. There's only one name we can attach to this, and that is Ian Henderson. And while research shows that he has had sporadic contact or worked with the OPCW over a period of 20 years, we don't know anything about his position at the time he wrote this. And we don't know anything about his position now. Mm-hmm. And the more time that goes by between, the time this was released and became such a big story, and we hear not one word from the supposed author, to me, that means it's really unauthenticated. It's really unverified. Not only do we not know if OPCW has seen it or what status it has with them, we don't even know if the the alleged author really claims it.
So some of these people are claiming that that this document has been suppressed by the OPCW. And is it an OPCW document? Is it part of the fact-finding mission?
I don't think it is. You know, if you look at the top of it, what they call the confidentiality classification, you know, OPCW has 3 different confidentiality classifications, but OPCW sensitive, which is what this document is marked as, is not one of those. And I have challenged the people who support this document to find one other document with this kind of, you know, classification. It says unclassified, which the more you think about it, if it starts out unclassified, there's no reason to put unclassified on there. You know, I could put unclassified before every blog I've written. You know, virtually everything I've written is not classified by anything. There's no indication this was classified by anybody.
So we don't know really who Ian Henderson is, and we don't know if he was part of the fact-finding mission, or maybe this was just his opinion that he sent in. And as you pointed out, he sent it in rather late.
Right. Yeah, he sent it in 2 days. Well, actually, you know, Stanley, we've been saying because it's dated on the 27th that he sent it in on the 27th. You know, in a lot of ways, we've been giving this guy we haven't heard from a real benefit of the doubt. Now, it's one thing to date something on one day. It's another thing to make sure it's received on that same date. And given that he was so late in dating it, it's dated 2 days before the report came out. There's no reason to say he rushed in there the same day and got it to him. So we don't know, A, if the OPCW even received it, or if they received it even before March 1st. We just know it was dated 2 days before that.
And we should say the years, because we throw out March 1st and so on. So
yeah,
the attack was last year in April. The final report from the OPCW comes out is it March 1st or
March 1st of
March
this
1st
year,
of this year,
2019, yeah.
And this Ian Henderson document is dated a couple days early.
Right, 2 days before that. So to me, that tells us that this document was not produced with the intention of affecting the final report. The engineering and other studies had been due in and were in 2 months before that, in time for those to be aggregated and, you know, gone through and included in the final report. So this latecomer, I don't think it could they realistically expected that was going to affect the final report. I don't know what the expectations was for it.
Now, the original or the final report, I mean, what is that based on? I assume lots of studying. They went over there to Syria. They spoke to witnesses. They examined material. I assume it's a lot of different pieces of evidence.
Oh, yeah.
All thought about it.
Yeah, that basic report is, you know, the final report is 106 pages long, and it references a lot of other material outside of the report. The OPCW's mandate in this case, I think it can be rather, it was rather narrowly defined. Unfortunately, because of some restraints that certain Security Council members, permanent Security Council members have put on them, they have not been fault-finding missions. They've been fact-finding missions, but they have been specifically prohibited from saying who, you know, it's kind of like a crime investigation where I kind of think of it like the Mueller investigation where you're investigating a criminal, but you're not allowed to bring an indictment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of part of the world we're living in. Kafka's world we're living in.
So what did the OPCW conclude about the facts on March 1st?
they concluded that most likely that they concluded the people had died from chlorine exposure. That most likely the chlorine exposure had been air delivered, that is dropped. But they didn't make any predictions about the height, and they did not mention helicopters at all. They did not go into, they said, and in response, in fact, to the Russians' criticism or objections, they said, we deal only in assumptions. I mean, we do not deal in assumptions, and they put that in bold. They said we deal with facts and information.
Mhm.
So that's what's in their report, facts and information. Obviously, certain conclusions can be drawn once you conclude that it's been air delivered, because we know who controls the airspace, over Douma at that time and over Syria generally. And it's not the opposition, it's not the jihadists, and it's not the Free Syrian Army. There's no Free Syrian Air Force.
What does Henderson say? The OPCW says there was some airdrop and 40 or more people died.
Right.
What does Henderson think? He looks at the data of the fact-finding mission. What's his conclusion?
His conclusion is it couldn't possibly be dropped from a helicopter. Therefore, that had to be manually placed there. So his conclusion is basically it was a false flag operation. Did some people on the ground, he doesn't say who, but he everyone draws the conclusion it must have been the opposition, it must have been the jihadists gassing their own people. Interestingly enough, neither he nor the people supporting his theory feel a need to even go into how difficult it would be to manually place, two large orange or yellow chlorine cylinders that weigh who knows how many hundreds of pounds each, among the very people that you're going to murder. They don't address that at all. They just and this is what Henderson does, by saying that the FFM, the fact-finding mission, decided that they were dropped from certain heights from a helicopter, whereas the fact-finding mission doesn't say that. But Henderson is trying to prove that they couldn't have been airdropped.
Mm-hmm.
And he does this by saying it couldn't have gone through the holes in the craters that they were under, and one that ended up on a bed. That how could that have happened?
Right.
So it's basically raising questions about the narrative that appears to not as they would call it the official narrative. It's the narrative that anyone looking at the facts would,
But as you say, I mean, he doesn't talk about the alternative that he thinks is more likely. That people carried these cylinders up full of deadly chlorine, released it from these cylinders or from something else, wore protective gear or something, because they didn't die from it themselves.
Right, yeah.
They weren't suiciders. They did all this stuff, and then nobody noticed this, complained about it, and even though tens of people got killed. I mean, it's
right. And then when you look at the first pictures taken, of the scene, where there's dust all over the canisters, the gas tank, and there's dust and debris all over the scene. It also means they would have had just done this manual placement, somehow leaving all that dust intact and all that debris intact. In other words, without leaving footprints,
right.
As though they floated over the scene with the, which would have been a double form of air delivery, actually. Yeah. But the point is that they didn't float over the scene, and all the real facts do point to an air delivery. And then you can draw your conclusions about, well, maybe these people were killed by the same people that unquestionably were killing them before and are killing them now.
Now, I wrote to the OPCW, and they sent me a letter that I guess they sent to a lot of other people. and it didn't really answer this Henderson document, but it certainly didn't retract anything. And you know, it basically was, you know, we took in all the evidence, and this was our conclusion, and there it is. In summary, do you think this was a suppressed document? Do you know, because the certain people are, well, I'll tell you who, Ted Postal, this retired MIT professor,
Right.
he says the attacks were staged, and that, a quote, the OPCW finding was, quote, compromised by upper levels of the OPCW management, unquote. So he's saying there's a conspiracy.
That's what he's saying, right?
Right, that's what Postal said.
Right. Yeah, right. Robert Fisk fastened on pretty much the same way in his article on, you know, that it was suppressed. It was, you know, he was outraged by the way it had been suppressed, according to him, and, you know. But if you look at it, the first thing you have to look at is, as we talked about earlier, the date of it. How can you, you know, credibly make the claim it was purposely excluded from the March 1st report when it's dated 2 days before? You know, were they supposed to stop the presses because of what's in this document? When frankly, when you're looking at what's in this document, as I said, it violates so many of their guidelines. You know, it violates their methods, it violates their whole guidelines on what their findings could be, and include that you wonder, had they received it in time, how valuable would it have been? Again, we're just looking at an executive summary. So, you know, where was the other material? You know, why wasn't it attached to the executive summary? Is that going to be leaked? You know, is Henderson going to come forward? These are still questions we have on this.
Let's look at the bigger picture. How many chemical attacks have there been in Syria during the last 8 years?
There have been over 300 alleged chemical attacks in Syria. And, you know, Ted Postal is one of these people. I know on at least 3 occasions, he has come out to use his MIT credentials, you know, and his reputation to firmly say Assad didn't do it. And in fact, one attack was Clay Shanky, or how do you pronounce it? Was that in 2017? He came out with conflicting stories. He came out with one story about how jihadists had exploded a pipe full of sarin underneath a pipe bomb in a crater in the street, in the middle of the street, at the time when the Russians were claiming, oh no, we had bombed the warehouse. It was really a jihadi chemical weapons production facility, and that's how it got released. Yeah. And eventually Postal came around to saying, oh, the Russians may be right, because his story about how it was a false flag attack conflicted with their story about how it was a false flag account. Before that, he had come out when, so tragically, over 1,400 people, including like 300 to 400 children, were killed in East Ghouta in August of 2013. He came out then to say Assad didn't do it. And this whole crew of people that come out to say Assad didn't do it, they only do it when the publicity around a chemical attack reaches Western ears to the extent that people become concerned. Other than that, they're not even available on other chemical attacks to say that Assad didn't do it. They don't care. And certainly the day-to-day bombing that has tragically killed the vast majority, 99% of the Syrians killed in this war, you know, killed by non-chemical means, and in most cases, no dispute about who is responsible, no dispute about overall who's been responsible for the massive dislocation and death toll in Syria.
From what I understand, of all these chemical attacks, they say ISIS did a couple with, I think, mustard gas, and there might have been one by some group from the Free Syrian Army.
Right, yeah.
Almost every other one of these hundreds and hundreds was from Assad forces.
clearly. And there's outside forces and their supporters like Postal and basically and like Robert Fish. They always claim that the jihadists did it, even in the case of the sarin attacks or the chlorine attacks. And the curious thing about that is we don't see any history of them using, for instance, sarin against Assad's forces.
Yeah, yeah.
Why would they just, if they had this weapon, there's no proof they ever produced it. And the people that claim like Fist does that it could be produced in a bathtub, or even Postal, and he should know better. I know his credentials aren't in chemistry, but he could consult with somebody, and find out that producing sarin is a big deal. That Japanese group that produced enough to, take out some people in the subway, they spent $2 million converting a 2-story building basically into a sarin factory. That's, you don't produce it in a bathtub. So the idea that
we've been talking about the facts around this, but now we're getting into the motivation. I mean, these people have been in Syria, been defeated, and Assad is winning, and they're going to take whatever weapon they have, this chlorine, and use it against their own people, their own kids in some instances. For what reason? They think, that Donald Trump is going to feel bad for them, and he'll change all of U.S. policy and then decide to help them. I mean, that's the motivation. It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. And to bring up that motivation now, they rate that motivation that, according to Assad's people and his supporters, that had been the motivation for every what they claim is a false flag attack. Each time, the reason is they would kill their own people is to bring America in on their side. Even though it's been shown time and time again that won't work, that won't happen, And to me, it's a sad caricature of the first time that happened. And something that is hidden pretty much by both sides, that is a commentary on our current situation. That is when in August of 2012, Obama came out with his famous red line statement. And he said, if Assad uses chemical weapons, that would be a red line for me, then we would use military action. The subtext of that was, of course, that Assad could go on with barrel bombing and using napalm and cluster bombs, and artillery and everything else. And he did. He even stepped that up and he even started using chemical weapons, and Obama ignored them, till finally he really pushed it. A really big attack that couldn't be ignored. 1 year later, precisely on the anniversary, precisely to the day, if you take into account the different time difference between Damascus and New York or Washington, killed over 1,400 people. I hear the final total was more like 1,700 with sarin. And Obama hemmed and hawed, and he found a way to avoid, and he reneged on his promise. And most people in the peace movement in this country celebrate. America didn't take a step toward war. But the practical effect among the Syrians was devastating. Among the opposition, they felt stabbed in the back, the moderate rebels especially. The jihadists could celebrate and say, see, I told you so. I told you what, align yourself and rely on Western powers will get you. And the Assad regime could celebrate too. So I think it was no accident that in the months following that, Mosul fell to ISIS. And the jihadists started gaining strength, even as the moderates were losing strength.
Well, we're getting into whole bunches of other areas. Maybe we can talk about this at another time. But let me tell people that all this is examined in huge detail on your website. What is your website?
It is Lennox Beach, it's if you just Google Lennox Beach, or you go to Blogger, and on Blogger it is, let me pull up the URL here. It is Clay's Beach, CLAYSBEACH.blogspot.com.
Okay, and so our viewers can, get much more in this. And I would like to thank you very much for speaking with me on this subject.
Okay, thank you.